Good afternoon, buenas tardes, and welcome to the City Club of Portland, Portland's own Citizens Forum. My name is Susan Hammer, and I am president of the City Club. Before we begin, I'd like to tell you a little story. Once upon a time, I came to City Club, and I took a call on my cell phone right before I walked in, and then I stuffed my phone in my purse, and in the middle of the speaker's program, it went off, and there was the overture of 1812, and I was so embarrassed, and it interrupted her speech, and I couldn't find it. You get the idea? And the moral of the story is, next week we will not be having City Club. We'll have a Thanksgiving break. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Our next Friday forum will be on December 1st, when we host Peter Cookson and Rod Creamer on the subject of school choice in the Portland Public Schools. We have a few events coming up. Citizens Read selection for this month is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, this will be held on Monday, the 27th of November at the City Club Commons. This is a novel about ethics and cloning of human subjects, and it's within the context of love and memory. Copies of the book are available at City Club or on the registration table. It's open to the public. Please call and let us know that you're coming. Details on this program and all the other things that are going on at City Club can be found in your bulletin or online at pdxcityclub.org. Also, information about membership and about our TV and broadcast schedule can be found in these two places. I'd like to give a special welcome today to the co-sponsor of our program, the Portland Library Foundation. We have two tables down here in front. They are sponsors of the Tapestry of Tales Family Storytelling Festival that brought our speaker, Olga Loya, to us today. And brochures about the festival are on your table. And Olga's materials, her books, CDs, cards, and other information about her can be found on the back table. I'd also like to congratulate you all on the great success of the library levy. We have one new member to welcome today. His name is Christopher Heaps. Christopher, could you stand and be welcomed to City Club? Where are you? I don't see you. Okay, we'll catch you next time. At City Club, we are so grateful to our corporate sponsors who help make these programs possible. Our sponsors for this quarter are Baron Liebman, LLP, and Zimmer Gunsel Frasca Partnership. Would you please join me in thanking them? Our program today is Storytelling, The Road to Bilingualism and Literacy with Olga Loya. Some of our earliest memories, both for ourselves and for our children, begin with the plea, tell me a story. Stories of good and evil, scary campfire stories, sweet stories where love conquers all. Stories of heroes and sheroes who perform courageous acts with undaunted courage in face of overwhelming odds. Stories that give animals their faces, feelings, and families, and speak to their connection to forests and rivers. But how many of us who were raised on Little Red Riding Hood, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and Cinderella had the advantage of learning stories that connected us to other cultures? We are so fortunate to have with us today Olga Loya, a Latina teller of tales, an author, teacher, and performer. She comes to us from San Jose and is in Portland, as I said, for the Tapestry of Tales Family Storytelling Festival. Olga Loya grew up in a home where there were no books. She learned the oral history by listening to her father and her grandmother tell stories. She's been a storyteller her entire life. She told me that in her early days it got her into a little trouble, and is dedicated to rejuvenating the art of storytelling. As she says, storytelling makes us closer, and we learn we're not alone, which is really important. As a Mexican-American woman, Olga performs personal stories with the goal of exploring struggles and complexity of being bicultural. Olga is a salsa dancer, and she's a great-grandmother. Just imagine the stories that her family hears. Please welcome storyteller, great-grandmother, and salsa dancer, Olga Loya.
Thank you very much. I like your introduction. I want to read you just a quote from Crow and Weasel by Barry Lopez, when Badger is speaking to Crow and Weasel. And he says, "The stories people tell have a way of taking care of them. If stories come to you, care for them, and learn to give them away when needed. Sometimes a person needs a story more than food to stay alive. That is why we put these stories in each other's memories. This is how people take care of each other. People do take care of each other with stories. Stories remind us of our humanity. Stories remind us to see how we are the same and how we are different. You know when you tell a story to somebody and then they turn around and they say, oh, that reminds me of, and then somebody says, oh, that reminds me of. That's everybody coming together and sharing their stories. I want to start with a story called Growing Up in East Los Angeles. I come by my Spanish naturally, but not easily. You see, in my family, all the grown-ups spoke Spanish to each other, but not to the children. And it wasn't because they were mean or trying to deprive us of our cultura, our culture. They wanted us to fit. They wanted us not to have an accent. They wanted us to be Americanos. It was the 50s and the schools didn't let you speak Spanish either. If you spoke Spanish, the teacher said, don't speak Spanish in school. And if you continued speaking Spanish, you got sent to the vice principal. And the vice principal would say, didn't we tell you not to speak Spanish? Why can't you people understand? And if someone continued speaking Spanish, the vice principal came to the classroom and would point to the guilty one, and the poor kid would come up all frightened, and everybody knew what was going to happen. The kid would put his hand out or her hand out, and the vice principal would hit them on the hand with a ruler, whack! And if they moved their hand back, they got hit harder. It scared me. I thought, I don't think I'm going to speak Spanish. I never said anything to my parents because I knew they would say to me, ay, Olga, what did you do? It must be your fault. The schools were the authority. At the same time that this was going on, I was hanging around with my Japanese friends. And my Japanese friends had an after-school program once a week for Japanese culture. And because I liked them and I liked hanging out with them, I'd go to the Japanese school. And the teacher would talk about Japanese and talk about Japan, and I'd listen and I'd think, why isn't there a Mexican after-school program? Why doesn't somebody teach us about our culture, our language? Why does everybody seem so ashamed? I had all these questions. I tried to ask my family, and they'd say, ay, Olguita, you ask too many questions. You don't need to know that stuff. Fortunately for me, I had two abuelitas, grandmothers, and an abuelito, a grandfather, who only spoke Spanish. My abuelitas, ellas hablaban todo el tiempo. They talked all the time. And my grandfather, he didn't like to talk. If you talked too much, he would get up and walk out and go sit in the garden to be alone. I was madly and wildly in love with my grandma Loya. Era bajita, she was short, delgada, thin. She wore her whole pupac and a moño in a bun. And she had high cheekbones and deep-set eyes. She was the kindest, most gentlest person I've ever met in my life. And she ran the family with an iron fist. When she said to do something, everybody jumped. She'd call my father and she'd say, Sandy, por favor, ven a cortar el zacate este sábado. That next Saturday, there would be my father cutting the grass at her house, even if the grass was up to our knees at our house. I'd think, how does she do that? How does she get everybody to do what she wants? I mean, I knew why I did things for her. I loved her. I wanted to please her. And I especially loved her because she never scolded me for being a tomboy. My mama was always saying, "Ay, Olga, why are you always dirty?" And my tias, my aunties were always saying, "Olguita, why are you always running from one place to another?" But I'd go see my abuelita all dusty and dirty. She didn't care. She'd give me a big abrazo, hug, and she'd say, "Mijita, ¿quieres una taza de café?" Coffee? Nobody gave me coffee. She'd give me a little bit of coffee and lots of milk. And we would sit and we would talk. She'd put her arm around me and I would fit perfectly. And she'd tell me stories about my daddy. I love those stories. She'd tell me stories about my tios and tias, my aunts and my uncles. I liked those too. And she didn't tell me too much folklore, but she did tell me one over and over, El mono y el cocodrilo, monkey and the crocodile. I love that story so much that I got to the place where I could tell it right with her, right along with her, just going along. Sometimes she would play music and clap, and I would dance. And somehow, all the time that I was with her, I didn't realize I was speaking Spanish. To me, it was grandma talk. My abuelita was 12 years old when I died, and it was as though my Spanish died with her. All through my teens, I didn't speak Spanish, and if I did speak, I spoke pocha, ¿Cómo está usted? I'd meet the old ones, the ancianos, and they'd say to me, ¿Por qué no hablas español? ¿Qué no eres mexicana? Why don't you speak Spanish? Aren't you Mexican? I would get so embarrassed. I mean, if there had been a crack in the sidewalk, I would gladly have fallen into it. I knew that I could understand it, but I was positive that I could not speak it. After I got out of high school, I went to college, which is another whole story. And my fourth year, I decided I would take a Spanish class. In the middle of the semester, the teacher came to me and said, I thought you said you couldn't speak Spanish. I said, I can't. She said, then why do you always answer everything correctly? I said, I don't know. That's what it sounds like in my head. And suddenly, like in the cartoons, you have the little light bulb that goes over their heads? That's the way it felt, like I had this little light bulb, and I suddenly realized I had all this Spanish locked inside of my head, and what I had to do was to find the llave, the key. I graduated and taught in Los Angeles, and then I moved up to Northern California, and for the first time, I wasn't working full-time. So I decided I would go back to college and take the gramática, the grammar. It was like an explosion in my head. Words bouncing around, rompecabezas, puzzle, madrugada, dawn. Empecé a soñar en español. I started to dream in Spanish. And one morning I woke up and I thought, I'm going to go home and talk Spanish. I went back to East Los Angeles. I walked in and I said, guess what? I can speak Spanish. And they all looked at me with that fish-eyed stare that grown-ups can give their kids. And we had the worst, most stilted conversation I've ever had in my life. I went home and I thought, what happened? And then I knew. The next time I walked in, I didn't talk about it, I just did it. I walked in and I said, Hola, Papa, ¿cómo estás? Hello, Father, how are you? And he looked up and without blinking an eye, he said, Muy bien, ¿y tú? Fine, and you? And we were off in the world of Spanish. But my younger brothers and my cousins, they don't speak Spanish. No tuvieron los abuelitos. They didn't have the grandparents. My older cousin, though, he used to hang around with my maternal grandma. He found out he could speak Spanish when he was in the Air Force hanging around with Cubanos. And one Christmas, I was home from Northern California. He was home on furlough. It was Noche Buena, Christmas Eve. That's when we celebrate. He walked into the kitchen, and I don't know why I said it, but I said, Hola, Eddie, ¿cómo estás? Hi, Eddie, how are you? And he looked at me and said, Muy bien, ¿y tú? Fine, and you? And then we looked at each other, and at the same time we said, You can speak Spanish? And we spent the whole evening delighting in our new old language. And all of the grown-ups watching us, because there we were, the black sheeps, once again being different. As a storyteller, I listen to how people speak. And I realized that it's very easy for me to go from Spanish to English and English to Spanish, because when I grew up, people said things like, Vamos a la house. Or, let's go to the casa. And my family, who tried so hard for me not to have an accent, failed completely. Because not only do I have an accent in English, I have one in Spanish too. Telling the stories from the folclórico de Latinoamérica, the folklore of Latin America, and de mi vida, my life, feels like an adventure. I feel like I'm traveling through my cultura, my culture, and through my vida, my life, and it's a road that I want to travel for a long, long time. So storytelling can take you and make you change. It brought me back to my culture. It helped to bring me back to my culture. It brought me back to my language, because that's when I began to realize that I could speak Spanish, and I really began to pursue Spanish. I think it helps people to see their cultures, and storytelling can help to do this, to see your own culture. It helps to see other cultures, but it helps to see our own cultures. Like for me, that story really changed everything. And I didn't even realize it was an immigrant story. The first time I wrote the story, I had a friend and I used to try things out on, and I went over and I said, hey, I've got this story. And I was so embarrassed. I was very, very new at it. And I had my back to her, and I was reading it to her. And when I turned around, she had her head in her hands, and she was moaning. And I thought, my God, it's not that bad. And I leaned over, and she was saying, the same thing happened to me in Yiddish. I have people come to me from all over different countries and talk to me about how they had that happen to them. They talk about the grandmothers that they had that taught them the language. They taught them about the grandmothers that they did not have, that did not speak the language. And it's just not Spanish, it's Japanese, German. Every culture has had this happen when they come to this country, and they're encouraged to not speak the language, to be Americans. But there's a power in speaking your own language as well as English. When I was little, as Ms. Hammer said, they didn't read to us, but they talked to us all the time. My grandma, she used to tell stories. My father was a very good storyteller. And it was a time when people would come together and visit. Not like now, you have to call somebody and make an appointment for 6 weeks ahead of time to get together with somebody. People dropped in on each other, and there was constantly conversation going on. So that even though we did not have books in the house, we had words in the house. We had a chance to hear all these different conversations and these people and the stories about the family. My family didn't have a bunch of folklore. Probably the two stories that I remember the most are the Mono and Cocodrilo and La Llorona, the wailing woman, that my grandmother used to tell us and scare the bejabbers out of us. And the funny, with scary stories is that we didn't want to hear them, but we wanted to hear it. We'd say, oh, tell us about La Llorona. No, don't tell us. Tell us about, no, don't tell us. Tell us. So we'd go back and forth because it was scary, but we liked that creepy feeling. My family did a lot of dichos, sayings, proverbs. My grandmother on my mother's side was a walking dicho, actually. And part of for me is I didn't really learn a lot of the dichos because I was what you would call traviesa, mischievous. And the proverbs a lot of times are for teaching lessons, to teach you about something. But one of the ones I remember that my grandma on my father's side used to say was, La conversación es el pasto del alma. Conversation is food for the soul. That was way before Food for the Soul books came out, a long time ago. So he talked about the types of visiting and talked about, and I do a lot of work with parents, Spanish-speaking parents, third world parents. And one of the things that I say to them all the time is, you need to tell the stories. You need to tell your stories. You need to let the children know that you have these places that you've come from. Because a lot of times they don't want to talk about it because it was difficult. But then the children have no history, and that's a way for them to get history just by talking to them and telling the stories. And a lot of times they say, well, when are we going to do it? And I say, how about turning the TV off? They get this very stunned look on their face. Turn the TV off? I said, yeah. Take an hour, just a little while. Be with your children. Really be with them, not running this way and that way. Use the stories to help them to learn more about life, to learn more about themselves, and to learn how to begin to think about reading, because stories can encourage you to read. When I discovered reading, I fell madly in love. I mean, I read everything. I was what you would call an indiscriminate reader. Because nobody in the libraries, not like the libraries here, they didn't help us at all. We ran wild. So I read every which way, that way, this way, that way. But it didn't matter, because it was like this whole new world of a whole new world of different places that I had never heard of people that I'd never seen. My brother is the same way. As soon as he found books, he went crazy. And he's a real big reader, so am I. We're the only ones in our family that went to college, and I can't quite figure out how that happened. But for some reason, we really got a hold of it and got a hold of the whole idea of language and story and words. My family, my parents, they used to really puns, lots of puns. So maybe I grew up with a love of words because they loved to play with puns. Both my mother and father were very, very funny that way. So I got a real appreciation for words in a different way, not in the reading, but in hearing the words. And when I got to the place where I learned how to read, I loved it. Sometimes people have strange ideas about bilingual. I was in Jonesborough, Tennessee, and I heard this. I went to this desk clerk and I asked her, she asked me, what kind of stories do you tell? And I said, well, I'm bilingual. And she started to laugh. She laughed so hard, she looked like she was going to fall over. And I'm thinking, it's not funny. What is she laughing about? And she told me that her manager had been told that she had to write everything bilingually. So what she did was, she got a big piece of paper, she put a line through the middle of the paper, she put one half in English, and she put the other half in English. And for that was bilingual. So, whole different concept. For weeks I laughed on that. So you have different ways of looking at it. And also, people think that you speak Spanish, that everybody understands it. It's not so. I went to a storytelling conference in Guadalajara some years ago. There were 60 tars from all over Latin America. And it was interesting that we couldn't understand each other because some people talk really fast, some people cut the ends of words off. I was in a bus with a Colombian guy, and we were listening and we were laughing because we couldn't understand half the people that were talking. And they were all speaking Spanish. We had to keep slowing each other down and finish the words. We would teach people from Argentina swallowed the endings. We kept teasing them about swallowing. So when people think that, you speak Spanish, you can understand all of it, it's not so. And also you have to be careful with words too. The words, like the play with words. A word can mean one thing in one place, and another word, it can have a sexual connotations. It can get you in trouble. I was down in California in the south, right by the border, and I was telling a story with pollo. And every time I said pollo, all the kids would hysterically laugh. And so I stopped using pollo. You started using chicken, that's what it means, pollo. Because I realized there was some kind of charge to the word. And at the end I asked, what did pollo mean to them? And to them, because they were on the border of Mexico and California, a pollo is a person that's brought across the border illegally. It's the coyote who brings them, and the pollo. And so that was the charge of it. But I didn't know that. So sometimes when you speak in Spanish, you can say words that can set off a group of people and you don't even know what's going on with it. So it makes it even more interesting. And for me too also, it's like I have people come up to me and they'll ask me, so tell me this, they'll ask me, like, what is this a word in Spanish? And I'll say, I don't know. And they'll go, don't you speak Spanish? And I'll say, yeah, but do you know every word in English? And they go, well, no. I said, well, the same thing, I know a lot of words, but I don't know them all. I want to tell you a story that is about past, because stories are not just for present. They can help us. It's good to learn about our past, to learn where we came from. I met my 76-year-old cousin for the first time 6 years ago. She's a daughter of my Uncle Ray, who was the third son of 15 children, 10 of whom survived. And we never met because when I was born, her family moved to El Paso, Texas. And by the time she came back, I was gone. We just never connected. But about 7 years ago, I got this album with pictures of my grandfather, my grandmother, and my uncles and my aunts, everybody with little stories about them. Oh, I was on that phone calling her, and we played phone tag for a long time until we finally caught up with each other. And 6 years ago, we got together for the first time, and she was full of stories. My father grew up, he was born in the United States. There were 5 children in the United States, 5 in Mexico. And her father, my Uncle Ray, was born in Mexico. And he knew all the stories from Mexico. I mean, I'd heard pieces of them, but it was like a quilt coming together. A crazy quilt, but a quilt. And I want to share a little tiny story that she told me. My grandmother, Maria Bonificia Mesias Loya, lived with my grandfather, Pedro Rojas Loya, in a little rancho just outside of the Ciudad de Juárez. And Juárez is a border town. It is and was a border town. It's Juárez, Mexico, the river, a bridge, and the other side is El Paso, Texas. And they lived there with their children. My grandfather was the town marshal of Juárez. And every morning they'd get up, my grandmother and my grandfather, and she'd make him this big breakfast with huevos and tortillas and chile and arroz, everything, and make him big tazas de café, cups of coffee, and they'd sit and they'd drink their coffee and talk about the children and family. And then he would go to his office. My grandfather was known as a no-nonsense man, a good but fair man who liked order. And then the Mexican Revolution started. When Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata were trying to get the land back from the government, my grandfather, he hated the revolution because revolutions are messy. They're not orderly. And he did not like Pancho Villa. He'd say, ese Pancho Villa es un ladrón, that Pancho Villa is a thief. And Pancho Villa heard, and he said, when I get to Juárez, the first person I'm going to hang is José Pedro Rojas Loya. And one day, a friend of my grandfather's came and said, te tienes que ir, you have to go. Pancho Villa is coming this way, and you know what he said. So my grandfather went to my grandmother and said, nos tenemos que salir ahora mismo. We have to leave right now. Pancho Villa is coming now, and he's going to kill me, but he's going to kill all the familia too, because nobody can avenge me. So they packed up everything, including their 5 children. And they went to the bridge, and when they got to the bridge, he said, no me voy contigo, I'm not going with you. No puedo. I've got to go back with my men. She said, no, you got to come with me. No, I have to go with my men. And she looked in his eyes, and she saw that she was not going to change his mind. And so she went over that bridge, turned and waved, went into a land that she did not know, where they spoke a language she did not know, stayed with his cousins that she did not know, not knowing if she was ever going to see him again. And he went back. They barricaded the offices, but it was to no avail. There were too many Villistas, and they overran everything. Many of his men were killed, and my grandfather was captured and put into a tower in the Virgen de Guadalupe church. And in the meantime, my grandmother was going crazy, wondering if he was alive or dead. And my Uncle Ray, who was 11 at the time, kept saying, let me go. I'm only 11. They won't do anything to me. No, por favor. Solamente tengo 11 años. I'm only 11. Finally, she could stand it no more, and she said, vaya con Dios, go with God. Que Dios te bendiga. May God bless you. And my Uncle Ray went over that bridge, went to the town, found out where my grandfather was, and he was right. They did let him in. And he saw my grandfather, and they saw each other, and they hugged and they kissed. They were so excited. And every day after that, he was a messenger from my grandfather to my grandmother. And sometimes my grandfather would sit with him and say, ay, nunca voy a ver a mi familia otra vez. I'm never going to see my family again. Oh, this is terrible. Oh, what am I going to do? And my Uncle Ray didn't know what to say. Well, one day, my Uncle Ray was walking along, and a soldier stopped him and said, you know, your father is a good but firm man, and we hate to see him killed. So we're going to give him one chance to live. Tonight, we'll leave the door open. But if he turns, we will be obliged to shoot him. My Uncle Ray ran up and told him, and my grandfather said, oh, no, they're going to kill me. And then he started to laugh. He said, pues me van a matar de todos modos. They're going to kill me anyway. I might as well try it. So that night at midnight, he went to the door and turned the knob, and it opened. He got to the top of the stairs, and he thought to himself, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die with dignidad. He straightened his back, and he went down those stairs, and he got to the door. There was holy water, and he blessed himself. He said he was going to turn around and genuflect, but then he remembered what they said, and he ran. My Uncle Ray was waiting for him, and they went over the bridge. They went to the house that my grandmother had rented by the river. And they were happy there, except that my older uncles and my grandfather worried that the only thing between them and the Villistas was the river. Well, one night, they were just talking. They had just turned the kerosene lamp, and they heard rustling across the way. They looked out, and they couldn't see anything except something shiny. And then they heard, "Cobarde, sálgate de allí! Coward, come out of there!" Oh, and my grandfather called out, "Yo no soy cobarde, I'm not a coward, but I'm not going out there." He handed the shotguns to my older cousins, and they waited. My older uncles, and they waited. And then whack! Gunshot. And there was a gunfight. And finally they heard the Villistas go away. And my grandfather said, "Oh, ya estamos seguros, we're safe now." But a few months later, the Villistas came back, and there was another big gunfight. And that's when my grandfather said, "Nos tenemos que mudar, we gotta move." And they had some friends who had gone to California, to East Los Angeles. So they packed up everything and moved to East Los Angeles. And that 11-year-old boy was my Uncle Ray, who told the stories to my cousin Stella, who told them to me. So I say to you, ask everybody in your family for stories, because you never know who's going to be the story holder. And it's really important to get the stories, and it's important to tell the stories, because with stories, you can have all of literacy. You can have the listening, the telling, the reading, the writing, everything together at one time, so that you don't have to be thinking about separating them. They can all come together. It's a wonderful way to get people going on stories. I wanted to just go over one thing that I skipped here. Let's see, what did I do with it? Oh yeah, storytelling is important in the development of good listening skills, patterns of language, vocabulary, visualization, symbol association, sequencing, insight into human behavior. All that can happen with a story. That's just amazing. You can go to the library and get all the stories. You can go to the library and hear stories. But you can also tell your own stories. And it's really important to tell your stories, because if you don't tell the stories to your children, the stories will die, because they will not have them to tell to their children. And it's really important to remember the stories and to help them to think about their stories. It's a way of breathing life into culture and words. You can have the words, and then stories add another whole zest to them, because there's the expression and the words and the energy that comes from the person who's telling the story. And it also helps us to remember that storytelling helps us to remember that the world is very small. Because you can hear a story from one person, and then you hear a story that's a lot of the same thing happened to another person, you realize, one, I'm not alone, and two, the world is a very tiny little place, really, although it seems like it's huge. And in this time, with everything that's been going on in the world, stories have been especially important to help us to feel close to each other, to learn how to share with each other. And I think that a lot of ways, this has been a wonderful time for storytelling. I'll tell you, right after 9/11, I thought, oh my goodness, nobody's going to have any money to hire a storyteller. Those next 2 years were the best years I've ever had in my life. I had so much work because people really wanted to hear the stories. I want to finish up with one little tiny story, and then I'll open up to questions. Once there was a family of ratoncitos, mice. A mamá, a papá, a niño, and a niña. A girl and a boy. And they lived far away from everything and everyone. They lived in a house with a man who hardly ever came home. When he did come home, though, he cooked. He loved to cook. He loved Mexican food, enchiladas and tacos and frijoles, but he was messy. If something fell to the ground, he didn't even pick it up. He didn't care. He would just leave it there. Ooh, and the mice loved that. They would have great feast. He would go and they would eat for weeks on the food that he had dropped down. And every day, the mother and father would say to the little children, "Ten cuidado de los gatos. Be careful of the cats. Ten cuidado de los gatos. Be careful of the cats." And one day, the little boy came up to the mama and said, "Mama, ¿qué es un gato? What's a cat?" They'd never seen one. Remember, they lived far away from everything and everyone. She said, oh, es un animal grande. It's a big animal con ojos grandes y brillantes with big, bright eyes. Bigotes largos, long whiskers, dientes grandes y afilados, long, sharp teeth, and a cola, a tail, and you can help me with this, that goes back and forth. Can you do that with me? Back and forth, back and forth. And the father said, sí, y los gatos son muy peligrosos. Cats are dangerous. Sí, mamá. Sí, papá. Well, every day, the parents said, ten cuidado los gatos. Ten cuidado los gatos. But you know, the mice never saw any cats, so they stopped paying attention. Ten cuidado los gatos. Uh-huh. Ten cuidado los gatos. Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm. Well, finally, one day, they were going out and they were playing, and they got far away from their house, and they came around the corner, and there was this beautiful animal with ojos grandes and brillantes, big, round, sharp, big, bright eyes, bigotes largos, long whiskers, and a cola, a tail that went, you ready? Back and forth, back and forth. They forgot everything their parents had said. They walked around, they looked at that beautiful animal, they got in the front, and then the animal smiled, and they saw the big, sharp teeth. They remembered everything their parents had said. They said, ¿Eres un gato? Are you a cat? Meow, sí. Well, the mice knew they could not run that cat. So they called, help, help. Oh, the papa was looking for them, and he came and he stood in front of them, and he looked up and he saw this animal. Oh, those ojos grandes y brillantes, those big, bright eyes, and bigotes largos, the long whiskers, the dientes grandes y afilados, those big, sharp teeth, and that cola, you ready? Goes back and forth, back and forth. And he was scared. He called out and he said, help! And the mama, she was looking for them. She came in and she ran in front of them, in front of the husband and the children, and she looked up, and there was that animal with those ojos grandes y brillantes, and the bigotes largos, the dientes grandes y afilados, and that cola, the tail that went back and forth, back and forth. And she thought, I'm not going to let that animal hurt my familia. She stood up on her very tippy toes. She looked him in the eyes, and she said, bow, wow, 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 wow. And the cat was surprised. It went running in the other direction. And the mice, they ran home. And when they were home, safe and sound, she said, see, it's good to be bilingual. So I would like, if anybody have any questions you'd like to ask me, I can try. Yes?
Wait a minute. Wait just a minute. I'm going to introduce it.
Okay.
Okay, I'll be right with you. Excuse me just a second. We're going to need to take questions from the microphone because this is being recorded for radio and TV. Our first question, however, will be asked by Molly Raphael. Molly is a member of City Club. She is a member of the program committee, and she is director of libraries for Multnomah County. So Molly will ask a question, and then anyone else. And normally this is just City Club members, but today we're going to open up to guests, people from the Library Foundation, others that are here. Please just go to the microphone right over there and ask your question to Olga Loya.
Thank you, Susan. And I can't resist being in a microphone and saying my own personal thanks on behalf of the library, all of the library staff for the support of the library levy last week. It was really wonderful. And also the opportunity to thank the Library Foundation for the terrific work they do to support and enhance library programs such as Tapestry of Tales, and also bringing Storyteller for the second year in a row as part of the City Club Friday Forums. So my question, having been a children's librarian many, many years ago and struggling to learn to memorize stories as children's librarians often do, is how is it that one who is a good storyteller, and I think we all know people like that in our lives, we love to hear them tell stories because they're just so good at it. How do you make the leap from being that kind of person to being a professional storyteller?
Focus, practice. Practice, focus. Finding people who are good storytellers to mentor you, going to festivals and hearing other tellers, seeing what they're like, not copying them. I was very fortunate. I lived in Humboldt County, so I couldn't copy anybody. There was nobody up there to copy. So I was able to develop my own style. But really it comes down to focus. If you really want to make that transition, you just need to go to the festivals. You need to find people to practice and study with. When I first started, if I heard a teller, that poor teller, I hounded them until they let me work with them. There was a woman named in Oregon named Cynthia Orr. I heard her at a festival, and I fell madly in love with her telling. And that poor woman, I wrote her, I called her, when can I work with you, can I study with you? And finally she let me. She let me come and study with her. And I still to this day find tellers that I like, and I'll go and do workshops with them. A lot of my movement that I do and sound is from going to a J. O'Callahan workshop and discovered that whole element that I hadn't been working with before. So I think really, but focusing to decide that you really want to do it and pursuing it, that's when the transition goes over. Because like for myself, I was always a good teller. I mean, I love to tell. It's like my Spanish that I didn't know I was speaking Spanish, I didn't know I was telling. I taught a lot of years, and I always told when I was in school. And since I'm little, I've done improv. I've done improv since I was a little girl. And somewhere along the way, I thought I'd try to figure out how to do it, and then I decided I better not try. It might break. So I backed off from it. I don't have any idea how I do it, but it works. But since I was little, I've been telling. So any other questions? You had a question in the back that you were asking? You're good microphone right here?
Hi, I'm Cassandra Mick, member of City Club. Just curious, when you're gathering stories, I come from families who, of course, have rich stories, but we aren't in the habit of telling them or really listening to parents or grandparents tell stories. Do you have any hints or games or any clues as to how to get people to start talking?
Well, I have a lot of games that I use. I'll do one really fast. It's a chant, and it goes like this. I was sitting under an apple tree, and all the apples fell on me. Apple pudding, apple pie, did you ever tell a lie? Let me teach it to you right now. I was sitting under an apple tree, and all the apples fell on me. Apple pudding, apple pie, did you ever tell a lie? And this game is somebody tells a story, and the audience has to decide whether it's true or not. And if they think it's true, they do this. If they think it's not true, they do this. And if you get one person to come up and tell the story, then everybody starts doing it, because it's not storytelling, it's a game, which puts it in another whole place. So let's do the chant one more time. I was sitting under an apple tree, and all the apples fell on me. Apple pudding, apple pie, did you ever tell a lie? True, not true. Anybody else have any other questions? Oh, yeah, okay. Please, line up.
In what genre do you find the storytelling fitting, like an artist or an actor? As you travel through, how does the rest of the interrelation or interactivity carry on in different places? Because one of the reasons I look forward to this festival every year, this is the only time I can bank that there will be storytellers in town. And yes, I can go to the children's library, and they have different events, but they're not advertised like this, so you don't really know where to go to listen to people who are telling stories.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I consider myself an actress, a storyteller, a theater person. I do all of it. So I guess I go to all the genres, sort of like I'm a Mexican-American, Chicana, Latina, depending on my mood, you know?
So you do perform on stage at different
Yeah.
places?
I do.
Okay.
I do. And I also do the storytelling in library, schools, the whole thing. Some people just work in the stage, and some people will just work on storytelling, but a lot of us cut across everything.
Great. One place you could go is the Portland Storytellers Guild.
Pardon me?
you could go to the Portland Storytellers Guild. I'm Will Hornyak. I'm a storyteller. And Portland Storytellers, if you just do a Google search, we get together once a month, and everybody's welcome to come there.
Good.
I had a question, Olga. Why is it that stories sound so good in Spanish? Because the language is so beautiful for storytelling. And I have another question. What is it that makes a Latin culture so dedicated to the oral tradition? It just seems that in Mexico or Latin America, people just know how to have time and how to have conversation.
Well, for one, the language is a very beautiful, it's a Romance language, and it has a wonderful lilt to it. And I think a lot in Latin America, they are where we were 30 years ago, where they come together and they have parties and they visit. Like, I go to a little town called Yajalo in Chiapas a lot. I go to a lot of places in Mexico, but that's like my second home in Mexico. And people are constantly visiting and talking and telling stories. And so I think it's just the oral tradition is alive and well in Mexico. Not performance-wise. People don't go out and perform. But people can sit around and drink a shot of tequila and talk and tell stories. And one person tells a story and then another. So that's like reminds me of, that reminds me of, that reminds me. They can go all night long, people just trading stories. So I think it's part of that oral tradition, that it's continued, that we had at one time, that's gotten lost with everybody being so busy. I think we need to get back to that place of coming together and visiting. I've been doing that lately with friends, and it's really lovely, just sitting around and talking. No particular purpose, not going to the movies, not going to do this, just talking, visiting, telling stories.
Hi, I'm Maris Sumrall. I'm the CEO of the Library Foundation, and we are focused on supporting literacy programs in particular at the library. And we are often asked the question, what does storytelling have to do with helping children learn to read and helping children be set up to succeed in school? You talked a little bit about literacy, but I'm wondering if you could go back and touch on that a little bit more specifically.
I really feel like storytelling was saying before is that people, if you just tell them what storytelling does, because storytelling, what they're doing is they're listening, first of all. And most of the time after they start listening for a time, they start telling, because you can't resist. And then if you start telling, you get interested in books, because that's a lot of stories come from the books. And then from the books, you think, oh, I could write something better than that. And you write something better. So when they ask you, just tell them that. It's all tied into storytelling. It begins with storytelling and listening. Because really with children, they really are the oral tradition. That's how they start, by listening and talking. They're not reading, they're hearing everything and feeding it back as best they can. So storytelling is a wonderful way to work with literacy. Any other questions?
Our thanks to Olga Loya for a most interesting, entertaining, and enlightening presentation on storytelling. I want to thank our members and guests for being here today and for your participation, our radio and television audience for your interest in City Club. We are adjourned.
Thank you.